the potential for harm is enormous, and we know that for a fact. What you may not know is that for a while, Anthropic actually had a significant contract with the U.S. Pentagon, that is, the Department of Defense. And as I was catching up and reading this whole story that was unfolding, I was really interested to know, of all the other AI tools, why was Claude chosen?
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. I am so happy that you're here with me today. In the last couple of years, we have slowly but surely began to interact and engage with AI. Even though for some, there's still an uneasy feeling about using it, especially for business, a vast majority are using it. I feel like inevitably that's where we are headed. A lot of people using AI. I've spoken about this before, particularly as it pertains to ethical use of AI. And so today, I want to return to this conversation because a number of my long-term clients have been questioning the ethics behind the AI tools they use. And now, with this mass exodus we're witnessing from ChatGPT to Claude, this conversation bears revisiting from the lens of our ethical responsibility as we run our businesses. In case you're new here, my name is Aniki Shuru. I'm a racial equity coach and I help online business owners create racially inclusive and equitable businesses through the lens of truth-telling, calling in, and mindset. As we dive into the topic of ethical AI, I'd love to ask, when did you last stop and think about the values that are actually incorporated into the tools running your business? And not just the tools you use perhaps to write your emails or create content on social media, the tools that you trust to research certain things for you, to help you have a deeper understanding of the world, to shape how you actually do show up, whether it's on a personal perspective or a professional perspective. As you may already be aware, over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of noise about what people are calling a mass exodus from ChatGPT to Claude. Claude is the AI tool made by a company called Anthropic. I think this is a story we need to look at a little bit closer and discuss, because what's actually happening is a story about ethics. It's about undoubtedly power and how that power can be used and what it means really to be a values-led business owner in 2026 using these AI tools. Now, if you've been part of this community for some time, you've been doing the work of Represented, and that is asking, what am I not seeing in my business? This conversation is going to land differently, I feel, for you than it might for someone else who's not necessarily values driven. And so, my friend, lean in. So, a little bit of a backstory to catch you up on this whole mass exodus thing. Anthropic, as I mentioned, is the company that makes Claude. They are in the AI world known for being what is called safety first. Their whole ethos is built around the idea that AI needs to be developed carefully, ethically, with guardrails because the potential for harm is enormous. And we know that for a fact. What you may not know is that for a while, Anthropic actually had a significant contract with the U.S. Pentagon, that is the Department of Defense. And as I was catching up and reading this whole story that was unfolding, I was really interested to know of all the other AI tools, why was Claude chosen? And the reason they were chosen, according to reporting from CNBC, federal employees found that Claude produced more compelling results than other AI tools. It could show step by step reasoning for how it arrived at answers, which was really key for agencies that require strong auditing and verification. In other words, Anthropic was chosen because their AI was transparent, thoughtful, and accountable. And as I sat with that, it made me draw a line of similarity to the values-led online business owners I support, whom I ask to do the inner work because accountability is really the foundation on what everything is built on. The new U.S. administration issued a mandate saying the government would only contract with AI companies that agreed to allow their technology to be used for any lawful purpose. That included two things Anthropic had explicitly said no to. Number one, domestic mass surveillance of their citizens. And number two, fully autonomous weapons systems. Anthropic's CEO, Dario Amodei, according to NPR, said that the company could not, in good conscience, comply. They stated that mass domestic surveillance constitutes a violation of fundamental rights. Because of that refusal, Anthropic was designated a supply chain risk to national security. And what's interesting to note is that designation has historically only been used for foreign adversaries, countries like Russia and China, not on a US company. Well, until now. And the Pentagon stated that no contractor, supplier, or partner that does business with the US military could use Anthropic's tools at all. So, Anthropic's holding firm on their values has come at a cost. That's what it's like when a company says, we will not remove our ethics, even for what I understand to be a $200 million contract. And the story continues to get interesting, which you may already know hours after Anthropic was penalized. OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT, stepped in and signed the deal. The CEO, Sam Altman, had publicly said just days earlier that he shared Anthropic's red lines. And then he signed an agreement that relied not on explicit prohibitions in the contract, but on trusting that the government would follow existing law. And so, I want to ask you, dear listener, the question that raises for us as values-led business owners when there is a real cost to integrity, a $200 million cost, a reputational risk, a, goodness me, political backlash? Do your values hold? And maybe more importantly, have you ever thought about whether the tools you use every day were built by people who even have values to be tested in the first place? One of the most powerful things that can happen for us as online business owners using AI tools is when we start to see the invisible gaps in our own businesses, the things we weren't aware of, the daily erosions we've never had to think about. That awakening around AI ethics is starting to emerge. And I want to ground it in research because when we see the data, we have a very clear picture of what we're dealing with. And it's not something we can simply pretend we don't know the extent of. Once we understand the numbers, we see it for what it is. Let's start with AI generated imagery. And this is something I talk about extensively inside my online course Represented, because most of us who use AI in our businesses have begun to generate images at some point, whether it be for social media, for our websites, or even for marketing. And a couple of years ago, back in 2023, Bloomberg investigation analyzed AI image generators and found, I want you to really hear this, that the outputs depicted a world run by white male CEOs. I know it's not a surprise. If you're listening to this and you do this work, it is not a surprise. You know the patriarchy rules. And in that report, that investigation, it also showed, as they were analyzing those AI images, women are rarely doctors, lawyers, or judges. Men with dark skin commit crimes, while women with dark skin perform menial jobs. And what's important to note here, and I've said it before on AI related episodes, it's not by mistake, it's by design. That is the bias of the internet. The data these models were trained on reflect back to us at scale. The internet overrepresents whiteness, maleness, wealth. And guess what? So does the AI. Now, when I think about you, the coach, the consultant, the service provider who is trying to build racially inclusive and equitable businesses, many of you are using AI tools to perhaps generate images for your website, your programs, your social media. If those tools default to whiteness as successful and professional, if they associate dark skin with crime or low wage work, what message is that sending in your marketing? Who does it tell your potential clients you work for? Who does it tell them they need to be? Researcher Heather Hiles, chair of Black Girls Code, put it quite plainly when she said, people learn from seeing or not seeing themselves that maybe they don't belong. These things are reinforced through images, and I'll keep saying it. Representation matters. And so it doesn't stop at images. Think about content moderation. Who gets silenced online? I know for a fact the algorithm suppresses DEI content, which has impacted the reach of this work significantly. Whose content gets flagged? Think about the data sets used to train AI language models. If they draw predominantly from the global north, from English language sources, from platforms that favor white, Western educated voices, then the AI's understanding of the world is built on a fundamentally partial picture. Think about accent recognition and also think about who AI tools assume is the default user. Think about non-native English speakers asking an AI tool for help and receiving responses that don't understand the context. They don't understand their culture. A study published in Nature's Scientific Reports last year found something it called racial homogenization in AI image tools, describing nearly all Middle Eastern men as bearded, brown skinned, and wearing traditional attire, regardless of the context or even being prompted. Researchers have also raised concerns about what happens when these tools are used in context with real stakes, like criminal justice. AI-generated images used in policing contexts can reinforce in someone's mind that this is the person, even when it's completely faked. So let me ask you what I ask my clients. What are you not seeing? What are the tools you're using, doing in the background that you've never had to think about? Because the same way good intentions in your business can still cause harm if they're not examined, the same is true of the tools you trust. Let's sit with this one for a moment. In 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, there was a wave of corporate pledges around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Big public statements, black squares on Instagram, promises about representation, hiring, supplier diversity. You may remember it. You may have made some pledges too and possibly posted a black square on social media. Now, almost 6 years later, let's look at what the biggest tech companies, the ones building the AI tools running our businesses, have actually done. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, removed its entire commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion page from its website. The link, the URL, it now redirects to a page called Building Dynamic Teams, which talks about people with different backgrounds and no longer uses the word diversity. Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp eliminated its internal DEI team entirely. And this was reported in an article, I believe it was Tech Target. They ended commitments to diverse supplier sourcing, stopped diverse hiring and training programs. Their VP of HR cited the changing legal and policy landscape as justification. And Google, Microsoft, and Meta have now confirmed they will not publish any DEI workforce data this year at all, ending, I believe, a decade-long practice of transparency that civil rights groups had spent years fighting and advocating for. Now, I want you to think about what this means through a represented lens. We talk a lot in the program about the difference between performative inclusion and values that are genuinely embedded. I use an analogy to help explain this in simple terms. the generosity at Christmas analogy, where you're generous at Christmas because it's expected, but it's not actually who you are the rest of the year. This is that at a corporate scale. These companies made public pledges where there was public pressure. And when the political winds shifted, when it became costly to hold these commitments, they were the first things to go. And this matters deeply for us as heart led, values aligned business owners who are trying to do this work with integrity because the tools you are putting your money into, your data into, your trust into, the tools you're recommending to possibly your clients, and are being built by companies who have just shown us very clearly where inclusion sits in their hierarchy of priorities, which is an illustration of performative action and now completely abandoned, where you spend money and who you amplify is actually a value statement. And I think we need to start treating it like one. All of us, myself included, AI tools are extraordinary. They save an enormous amount of time. I use them, you probably use them too. A lot of my clients use them. And that convenience, that's precisely the trap because when a tool is doing the heavy lifting of research, content creation, and analysis for us, it becomes very easy to stop asking questions, to stop verifying, to trust the output without interrogating the source. Think about it this way. If you're using AI to research a topic related to racial equity or inclusion or the lived experience of marginalized communities, and that AI was trained on data that overrepresents white, Western, English language perspectives, what are you actually getting? You're getting a partial picture presented with the confidence of a complete one. And the more we rely on these tools, the less likely we are to notice the gaps because we're not doing the research ourselves anymore. We're outsourcing the thinking to a system that has its own biases built in at scale. This is the invisible gap applied to AI. Just like a lot of my clients have never thought to ask why all their clients were white because they'd never had to think about it, because nothing in their processes prompted that question. Many of us have never asked what values are embedded in the tools we use daily because the tools make it so easy not to ask. And I want to be really clear. I'm not saying stop using these tools. No, I'm saying use them with the same consciousness that you bring to the rest of your business. The business owners who make real progress aren't the ones who have all the answers, and nobody has all the answers. They're the ones who are willing to keep asking uncomfortable questions, to sit with the discomfort long enough to actually find out something new, something they did not know before. And I witness this when I support my clients who desire to go beyond skin deep. That same capacity, it applies here. Now, I always want to make sure we leave conversations like this with something we can actually do, because sometimes you hear things and you're like, okay, so what do I do? Where do I move from here? Because if we can ground ourselves, because now we have the awareness, then we can begin to cultivate spaces that are more ethical, that are more equitable, that are more inclusive. And so here are some genuine invitations for you. The first one is simply this: get curious about the tech you're using. If you have a stack of tech, note it down. And you don't have to be an expert like ethics researcher or whatever. No, just note down what you're using because that's where it begins. And then it's worth knowing who builds the tools you use, what values have they publicly stated, and what have they removed? What are they building for? Key question, what are they building for? Who are they building with? Number two, look at your AI generated content with fresh eyes. If you've been using AI to generate images for your business, spend some time actually looking at them. Who's represented? Who's not there? What assumptions are these images making about what success, professional, or beautiful looks like? You might be surprised what you see when you look through this lens. The third, stay in your own research. And what do I mean by this? AI is a research tool. Treat it as such. It's not a replacement for your research, especially on topics related to equity, justice, and the lived experiences of marginalized communities. Go to primary sources, my friend. Read the actual studies. Listen to the voices of people with lived experiences. Don't let the algorithm be your primary educator on this work. Number four, and we've seen this in the last couple of weeks, and it's so beautiful to see and witness. Use your voice and your purchasing power. Your choices matter. Which companies you support with your subscription fees, which platforms you amplify, which tools you recommend to your clients. All of this sends a signal and it ties in with your values. And number five, and this is the most important one, be willing to not have it all figured out. The paralysis of perfection is a real one. I see it inside my program represented all the time. Online business owners who don't take any action because they're afraid of taking the wrong one. But you know what? Doing nothing out of fear of doing something imperfectly is still a choice, and it has consequences. You don't need to have the perfect tech stack before you so you can begin to care about this. You just need to begin to care about it now and then start asking those questions. Gonna take a deep breath. Breathe in, breathe out, Annie. I know it's been a big one to dissect today. So here's what I want to leave you with. The ChatGPT to Claude migration might look on the surface like people just choosing a different AI tool. But what I think is really happening is a deep desire for technology that's been built by people who actually care. People who care about ethics, about who gets harmed and who gets protected. And that same desire is what brings people to my program represented. That deep knowing that it's not enough to mean well, that the work has to go deeper than a DEI page on your website, or in this case, a DEI page that gets removed when it becomes inconvenient. The business owners doing the most powerful work in my community are the ones who keep asking, what am I not seeing, Annie? Because they genuinely want to know. And this requires a willingness to be uncomfortable. They're willing to be brave enough to look. And that's you too. That's why you're listening to this. If this episode has sparked something in you, friend, if you're ready to take that same lens and apply it to your business, your client base, the way you show up and who you're showing up for, the waitlist for the next round of Represented is open now. This program is about the willingness to do the work in community with some of the most thoughtful, committed online business owners I have ever had the privilege of working with. You can find out more and join the waitlist at anigishiro.com/represented, and that link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.